Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Daniel Weir. I am NACDL's Council for Special Projects and Foundation Manager, and this is the next webinar in our series of webinars on capital defense litigation initiatives. We are pleased to bring you today this webinar on what to look for in a mitigation specialist, featuring Liz Varkesian and Chris Chang. Liz is the Executive Director of ARC Inc., and she has worked as a life history investigator with defense teams since 2004 in trial and post-conviction cases in both state and federal jurisdictions throughout the United States. We're also joined by Chris Chang, the founder of 255 Research and Investigation, a London-based social enterprise focused on improving criminal defense investigation as a means of raising legal representation standards. And this webinar today is supported by a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Office of Justice Programs, Department of Justice, and its contents are not necessarily supported or endorsed by the DOJ. Thank you for joining us, and I am going to turn it over to Liz and Chris.
Awesome. Well, Chris and I are very excited to be here today. This idea for the webinar sort of came about with us talking about some of the questions that we often get from teams who contact us regarding finding a mitigation specialist or having us get involved in their cases in some sort of consulting fashion. And because the questions are pretty consistent and the advice that we give is pretty consistent, we thought that this would be a good webinar for folks out there. So we really appreciate people joining us, and we're excited to spend the next hour or so with you all.
Yeah, and thanks to the NACDL for hosting us today. And yeah, just to echo that point from Liz, I think we get so many questions, so many emails about mitigation specialists as people take on cases and get new clients. And I think, we felt it was a really good way through this webinar to just reach out to lots of people sort of around the country and also around the world today, and just kind of pinpoint the things that teams should be looking for, and also folks who are working as mitigation specialists, just taking a look at kind of the skills and the qualities that you guys should have as you move forward in this work. So I think we're going to start just by kind of, sometimes the best way to look at things is to sort of break them down into kind of really the crux of it, or the most simplest way of looking at things. And I think so the first slide is just really just taking it really back, down to the core of sort of what mitigation investigation involves. And I think the first point that you'll see on the slide is that mitigation investigation, it cannot be rushed. It really takes a long time to develop, and I think sometimes that is what we're finding in the emails that we receive from teams who are often saying that, hey, they have a really short time frame, they need to do this mitigation, and a couple of months is really not enough time. It just really isn't, and so many things have to be developed that teams who are taking on cases and taking on clients really need to be thinking about sort of kicking off mitigation as early as possible, because it's just such a long process to really do it well.
Yeah, I think about it sort of as a marathon and not a sprint. And so if you kind of use that as the framework for it, you're thinking about the long haul, right? And that's at the end of the slide, is that it's going to be time consuming, and it's going to take a lot of energy from a number of people on a team, and that it can't be rushed. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, because fundamentally mitigation, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is about creating relationships with people. And I'm sure for everybody who's joining us today, when you think about the relationships that you have in your own lives, the ones that really matter, the ones where you are connected to a person, you didn't just show up at their doorstep and ask them a bunch of questions. You took the time to get to know them. You took the time to understand the things that move them, that motivate them. And that's what mitigation is all about. It's to help create a space where people can share experiences that they've had at their own speed and in their own time. And so what we find is that when we are in a situation where we end up sort of moving faster than the person is ready for, we don't get the information that we need, right? And things can really backfire at that point. So I think this is a really important point, and something that people, should keep in mind every case that they take, is that there's no sort of silver bullet. There's no quick way of doing this. There are no shortcuts. Lord knows if there were shortcuts, we'd be taking them if they were effective, because this is really hard.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
totally.
So it's not that we're just saying this because we're saying it because it's the truth, right? And we wish that there were shortcuts, but there just aren't.
Yeah, for sure, and I think we'll touch more on this in later slides. But again, I think we have to also really think about the stakes in our cases, and these cases are the cases that we have are about life and death, and we have to really think about that, and really as much as we can take the time that's necessary to do this work and do it well, because again, being in a rush or rushing through, really looking at people's lives. Ultimately only leads us to be ineffective, and so we really need to have to do this well.
Totally. So a lot of the things on this slide, field work is going to take place typically when people are going to be available, right? So on weekends and evenings. And when you spend time with witnesses, you can expect that a mitigation specialist isn't going to go in there and sort of be looking at their watch thinking they have to go someplace in an hour, right? Because getting in the door and developing relationships means that there's no limit to the time. So I've certainly had plenty of instances, and I'm sure Chris has too, where I knock on somebody's door at 9 a.m. and I've ended up spending the whole day with them. And so that's the only person that I've seen that day, right? But the things that I've learned and the connection that I've made and the opportunity for that person to get to know me and for us to share in a space together, that's invaluable, right? So there is no, limit to the interview. There's no 9 to 5. I use another analogy. I use lots of analogies. If you're interested in the medical field, but working as a surgeon is, like very stressful, you're not going to choose to be a surgeon in an emergency room then, right? Because if you need to go someplace at 5 o'clock and there's somebody on the table that needs to be saved, you're going to stay and do the work, right? So you can be interested in this field, and we'll talk about the qualifications of a mitigation specialist, but it's really important that whoever you hire and whoever the team gets to be the mitigator comes with that sort of frame of reference.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is how we have to approach the work, especially looking at interviews or looking at witness meetings or meetings with family, is that we have to leave ourselves kind of open, especially in time and the space that we create to allow for these things. So we can't be telling people in advance, hey, I'm popping over to see you for 20 minutes, or we have to leave it open, because again, we have to allow that human connection sometimes to take as long as it takes. And sometimes, by thinking about it in that way, we lose things and we lose some of that connection, which is really important. So in this line of work, we really have to be open to be like that. Sometimes, unfortunately, the sort of the office door doesn't close, and we have to be open to kind of work late hours, to work weekends. And then as we look at kind of the work that we have to do with records and document collection, again, we really have to go as far as we can. We have to exhaust all the avenues, because everything connects with everything else. Our interviews, our documents, all the document review and analysis that we do, it's all connected. And so we have to take, just like our interviews, we have to take those as far as they can go to allow us to develop those relationships and get that really good information. And the same with the records and document collection. We have to go as far as we can. We have to keep sort of bothering records clerks and thinking about how, how one set of documents or how one set of records leads you to another and opens the door to another that may exist that we didn't know about, and just really stay on top of that, but go as far as we possibly can.
So one of the things that I wanted to do at the start of this webinar is to kind of help us all agree as a community about some definitions. And so I started doing this work about 14 years ago, and in the last 14 years, I've seen a pretty big shift in how people come to understand what mitigation is. And I think for people who've been doing this work longer than myself and longer than Chris, they would probably agree, right? I think there was a time when the death penalty was reinstated that there was this notion, that mitigation was sort of tethered to the sentencing factors pretty closely. And I think that through a lot of failures and successes, and through a lot of research, we've really come to understand that mitigation is actually it's well beyond a statute, right? What mitigation really is, it's about creating empathy. It's creating empathy in a system that actually resists empathic responses at every turn. So the criminal legal system, as everybody probably widely recognizes at this point, creates a lot of structural disadvantage and feeds off of the structural inequities within our society. So from the beginning, it's extremely important that teams have that orientation to understand that what mitigation is supposed to do is not just link itself to statutory factors, but it's really to help decision makers be moved to want to extend mercy and to give a person a second chance. That's really what mitigation is. And the way that happens is not to focus on just the traumatic experiences that a client may have had or the difficulties that a person might have suffered, but it's also to talk about the ways in which they have similar experiences to the decision makers in the case, right? So it's this connectedness that we're trying to build. These bridges to empathy is kind of how I have come to understand what mitigation truly is. It's a narrative that is true to the lived experience, which means that it demonstrates the peaks and the valleys of human existence, and that we can all recognize. Because if we don't do that, then what we're basically doing is creating a narrative that dehumanizes and others our clients more than builds bridges to connections. So throughout the rest of this webinar, when Chris and I are talking about mitigation, and when we talk about the work of a mitigation specialist, we're talking about somebody who has a particular skill set that's able to build this holistic narrative within a legal system and understands the limits and the considerations that have to be given when doing that kind of social history work.
Yeah, completely. And I think, empathy is so important to the work that we have both done and that we're all doing. My experience working on a large number of Guantanamo cases, I think in the early days, we all we knew is where people came from, and in many ways, all we knew were their numbers. There wasn't anything that we knew that was out there about these individuals, which would allow other human beings, wherever they were in the world, to connect with them, to be able to say, hey, that guy's like me, or he studied the same thing, or he has the same amount of kids as I do, and so I think empathy is so crucial, because without it, we have clients who are just labels, who are just things, and there is nothing as human beings for us to really hook onto and really connect with, and so. And we as teams and professionals working in this field also have to find that empathy ourselves, to be able to present it to others.
So what actually is a mitigation specialist then? So here on this slide, we provide the ABA guideline definition, which Chris and I both agree with wholeheartedly. We've put into bold one aspect of this definition that we feel is worth a discussion. And so when Chris and I were getting ready for this webinar, we had a lot of conversations about what it means to be a mitigation specialist. I would say that in the last decade especially, as juvenile cases, for example, are now moving toward needing a mitigation specialist more and more, The Office of the Administrative Courts now has a non-capital mitigation specialist role in a lot of federal defender offices, right? So we see that a lot of people are coming into this work, which is fantastic. And the need to increase diversity and the need to make sure that we have a deep bench of people who know how to do this work is extremely important. That being said, I think because the need is so great, that causes people to maybe look at folks who have some of the skills that might look similar to those of a mitigation specialist, but are not quite the same. So testifying is one thing that I would say, fall into that role. So I know a lot of people who are sentencing advocates or clinical social workers, and they might be able to provide testimony in a capital case. But your mitigation specialist is not a testifier. So Chris, when teams ask you why a mitigation specialist should not testify, what's the response that you give them typically?
I mean, I think both on the side of teams and both on the side of people who are practicing as mitigation specialists, I think, again, we already have it laid out in the ABA guidelines. That is something that we shouldn't be doing. When I go back to looking at empathy or looking to at ways that we present compelling narratives in court, again, I just don't believe that an investigator testifying is our best way to do that, because those narratives or those compelling, the most compelling testimony comes from the people who are connected to our client, most closely connected to our client, his family, his friends, people that knew him. And so I think, we shouldn't be taking on that role as storyteller in the courtroom. But I also think that sometimes it is a barrier to us going as far as we need to go with witnesses in our cases, the people that should be testifying. So I think that when we balk with a witness or a witness is hostile or difficult, then teams are wrongly saying, it's okay, don't worry. If worse comes to worse, our investigator, he can testify. He can step up in court and say what they said if they don't agree to do so. And so we're sort of, in some ways, kind of taking the easy way out, when actually what we need to do is sort of work on developing those relationships and developing trust and building trust to a point where we're getting really key people who we want to stand up and testify in court to feel comfortable doing so, to feel comfortable telling the kind of stories that we need to be told. And we need to be thinking that we need to be, taking that out of our head completely. Like, the mitigation specialist should not be testifying. The team should be thinking that on a whole. The mitigation specialist should be thinking that on a whole. And attorneys should not be thinking that that member of their team should be taking the stand.
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying. A couple other points that I think are really important for folks who are joining us today to keep in mind. I think about a lot of my lived experience shows me that when I feel close to somebody, it's a lot harder to dehumanize them, right? So Brian Stevenson talks about it as proximity. You want to become proximate to the people, right? And to bring them as close as you can to the decision maker. So I think that having people who are not proximate to the client makes it easier for people to view our clients as not having the support, as not being as human as they are, right? Because what jurors will often think to themselves is, if a family member doesn't come to testify, this person must not have anybody who loves them enough to stand in that space, right? Or if there's not a single teacher who could talk about the struggles that they had, or if there's not a friend, even if the friend was a friend at the age of 5, right? There have to be these people in our clients' lives, and there are, right? And decision makers want to hear from them. And that's what brings proximity into this decision-making calculus, right? And there's no substitute for it. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that it sets up some very difficult parameters for a mitigation specialist to operate in. So we define mitigation as building bridges to empathy, and we began to describe how your mitigation specialist is going to need to spend as much time as possible with people in the case, and that will extend to your client. If your mitigation specialist is somebody who is asked to testify, they will necessarily have to tell people that they cannot talk to them about certain things. Because if they get on the witness stand and they're asked a question, they may be forced to reveal something that is not in the best interest of your client. So your mitigation specialist is a full-fledged member of the defense team. And in the same way that you would not want co-counsel to be put on the stand, you would never ask your mitigation to get on the stand either, your mitigation specialist. So these are just some real things to think about in terms of how you are thinking about what this person is going to do and what the expectations are. And just ensuring that you're not putting anybody on your team in a situation where they can't actually function in the role that they're meant to be in.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, I think the last thing that we want to do is to, be putting team members in that position, which also ultimately puts our clients in a dangerous position. And so I think as we, are early on in this presentation, it's just a thing that kind of, I think this is a really strict rule that mitigation specialists shouldn't be testifying.
Yeah. So what's in a signature? That is Chris's title. I thought it was quite a good one, right? So I feel like signatures are a big thing. I think people put their qualifications in their emails, and I think about that a lot. And a lot of times teams will come to me and they'll say, I'm looking to hire somebody with this background. What do you think? And I think to myself about some of the most incredible mitigation specialists, and here are some of their pictures: Charlotte Holdman, Dana Reeser, Russ Stetler, and their histories are very broad. Charlotte Holdman, anthropologist; Dana Reeser, sociologist, later turned attorney; Russ Stetler, a journalist, right? And so there's no, again, if we could give you a shortcut, we would give you a shortcut. But there is no single degree that qualifies somebody to be a mitigation specialist. There are certainly degrees that may give people a sort of leg up on some of the skills that will need to be developed to do mitigation, such as journalism, such as anthropology, ethnography, psychology, social work, sociology, right? Anything that deals with trying to understand people, and understanding how to spend time in spaces that might not be your immediate space. Those are all things that a mitigation specialist needs to do. But there's no place that a person can go, no academic institution that is going to give them the kind of training that's necessary to do this work in particular.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I chose the title of this slide just because, again, yes, I think we see mitigation specialists in email signatures. We see it on business cards that we're given. And for myself, for a long time, I just had like investigator on a business card because that's what I was doing. And there were people like Charlotte who they were the ones who said to me, but you're a mitigation specialist. What you do, your skill set. And I didn't fully take it on board because I felt like, again, it's that thing, I felt like I was still learning and I still am. And, but yeah, I totally agree that some of the most important skills in this work are the human ones, are communications. I studied languages, which is what helped me to learn about how people communicate, and that's where I learned how you build trust through how you speak to people, and the language that we speak. And so the skill set doesn't necessarily come from having a law degree, and it may well do, but I think, again, we have to think about the people that we bring into our teams and all the skills that are needed, which a lot of them are very human, and that's what leads us to think about diversity, because each person that we advocate for, that we represent, or that we work for is different. and comes from a different place and has different behaviors and comes from different communities. So we have to think about that in terms of the skill set of the people that we have in our teams doing mitigation. I don't know, Liz, maybe you could tell them what you studied so that...
nothing useful, philosophy. So there you go. You can go to your local undergraduate and institution and see who's going to be desperate for employment because they've sat under a tree for a year and thought about what it means to be human. The other thing that I want to say about this slide is that, for all the attorneys who are joining us, if you are in a jurisdiction that is trying to force you to hire somebody who they believe is qualified just by the nature of their degree, you should be litigating that. Because that is absolutely not the way that you make a decision about how to structure your team. And I have seen in some counties where there is pushback when the team wants to hire somebody who's not a licensed social worker or not a clinician in some way, right? And there's a robust literature that addresses the fact that a mitigation specialist is a combination of skills and has to be able to do very specific things that a social worker or a psychologist might know how to do, but doesn't necessarily mean that they are the fit for this case. So just keep that in mind, and if there are questions about that later, we'll be happy to talk about them. But, so I'm going to leave this one to Chris. I really like this one. Yeah.
So, yeah, this is our just say no slide. It's a very English reference to a show called Grange Hill about a school in London. So I don't know if anyone knew about it, but maybe you'll find it on Netflix or something. But I guess what we're saying about just say no is a combination of different things in terms of sort of how we're putting a team together, like in an office or for a case or, as we start a case. And I think often in different jurisdictions or in different offices, like we have we have teams that have worked well together over the years. Attorneys, fact investigators, mitigation specialists, and often in some cities, it's the same team. It's the same team because, there's a rapport between the team. Everybody, likes each other. They enjoy working together. But that isn't always the best way to do it, in our opinion. And I think sometimes we have to step out of using that person who we know or using that person that we used to use over however many years, because we have to look at the people who are going to work on the case, who are going to be the best fit for the case and for the client, most importantly. And so we have to stop using our friends sometimes, when it doesn't serve the best interests of our clients. And I know that's difficult because, we like to work with people that we know. We like to work with solid teams who we've worked with over the years, but we have to get away from looking at ourselves in a way, because sometimes that's looking at our own interests and think, is this mitigation specialist right for this person, for the what we know about the case, what we know about him or her, the places that we need to go, what the investigation is going to involve, and sometimes we have to be, and say, hey,
just say no.
I'm not going to use you on this case because not because I don't think you're great, but because I think the case needs this, and maybe you don't have those skills. And we have to be, again, going back to kind of how high the stakes are in these cases. We have to really be brutal, like that, because we have to do what's best for the client.
I'll just also say that I really, to me, this Just Say No is a shout out to all my mitigator folks out there. Shout out. So here's the thing, right? My office, we get a lot of requests to work on cases. And for example, right now, there's a very large number of Spanish-speaking clients who are ensnared in the federal system. And I have but one Spanish-speaking investigator on my staff, right? And I don't speak Spanish. And I need to be able to communicate directly with the client in his or her own language, right? With the family, I'm not culturally competent. Like so I just say no, right? And I love the lawyers who are asking, for us to be involved, and it's great. I wish that I was a fit, because it would be awesome to work with a lot of the folks who come to us. But I have to just say no, because I know that I'm not the right fit, right? So there's a sort of global responsibility here by all parties, right? Lawyers, don't ask your friends, and mitigators, if you know that you're not right for the case, don't take it, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You know what? Don't take it, just say no, and help them find somebody who's a good fit. Like, do a solid for everybody, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, just to be really, really real with everyone who's logged on, I think, yeah, I mean, we know that this work, it's a job, we earn an income out of doing this work, but sometimes we also have to put that to the side and think, am I right for this case? Because at the end of the day, taking forward a case that you're not really qualified, or you don't have the skill set for, it's only in the end, it's sort of going to underserve the client, but it's also going to, underserve you in many ways, in terms of you being able to perform as best as you can. And it leads to cases where I've been contacted, and Liz has been contacted, where we've been contacted to help with the deficiencies that a team may have, because that person may not have 100% what's needed. So I think teams just have to really look, really kind of take on board, like, let's prepare for this case, let's look at it, let's see what we know based on the facts, and let's work out who's best, and let's ask other people, let's get recommendations, and then see who's going to be the best person for that case.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on this slide, is, I guess this is where my philosophy degree comes in handy, is existential dilemma, right? Like Chris just said, yeah, this is a job, right? And people need to survive. But I also think that there are a lot of jobs, right? I'm of the mind that there are a whole lot of jobs. And that if you're going to do this work, the thing that you have to commit to is the client more than anything. And that is a tough place to stand. But I feel like, if we're just in the interest of being real here, that's really, that's what your mitigator needs to be doing. So in terms of their caseload, in terms of their qualifications, right? Those are all the things that when we get towards the end of this presentation, will give you some, what I consider to be like screening questions for people. Those are the things that you're going to see, right? What is the caseload like? How much training have they have? What trainings have they gone to? Can they identify certain things, right? But really, you have to think about why it is you wake up each day and you choose to do this work. So I will leave you with that thought there.
So the next couple of slides, I think we're going to talk about something which is really important, which is teamwork, us working as a team. So I think we've talked just a little bit about kind of how we're assembling a team, or how we're kind of mitigation specialists that we want to bring onto a team. But I think we need to look at teamwork and how we operate as a team. I think I'm very lucky in my background to have come from a NGO background, which was very poor at the beginning, and we had very limited resources, and we had to, like, small numbers of people had to work out how we would get the maximum out on a lot of cases and have the maximum impact. And so we learned how to work very closely together on many different levels. And I think sometimes in terms of how things work here in the US, sometimes attorneys and mitigation specialists are sort of solo practitioners, and they're not necessarily used to being in the same office or in the same room. People are now more and more working remotely. But we have to sort of establish structures that are going to allow us to work more as a team. As a very minimum, we have to make sure that we have 2 attorneys, that we have a fact investigator and a mitigation specialist, and there may be a number of other people as well, paralegals, there may be other consulting experts on the case, but we have to think how we forge forward on a lot of these cases together, how we establish structures for sharing information, for ensuring that in many ways we sort of know what each person is doing. We're on the same page, and sometimes we're not always, because there may be an up and down sort of structure, and we have to really kind of level things off and say, look, we're all together here, and when we're together, like, we're doing more, we're achieving more, and we're being much more effective.
Should I go to the next one?
Yeah. And so this is my own little graphic here, which I like. I don't know if it's from the, like, for any copyright people, it's like that used to say dare. I don't know if you remember. So we're going to be daring here in the presentation. I got this from the team as well, like, to treat equally all members, because I feel like sometimes the different roles that exist in the team can sometimes lead to a certain inequality within the team. And again, this comes from the previous slide, where teams aren't always working together, or they are, but they're not everything's being shared. They're not having regular communication or regular team meetings, so people don't necessarily know, like, not everybody in the team knows sort of the whole strategy or what we're trying to achieve. And sometimes people in the team, mitigation specialists, attorneys, and fact investigators, are given sort of isolated things to do, isolated tasks to do, without actually knowing why. Like, what is the goal of me doing this? But again, people take it on sometimes and don't question why they're being asked, because they feel that it's for the benefit of the case. And sometimes I've seen where mitigation specialists are being sort of told that they're the ones that should have all the client contacts. Fact investigators maybe are the people that are being sent out to find witnesses, but then they're being told, well, sort of, be somewhat of a fixer, sort of find that witness, but don't interview that witness. Where sort of then the mitigation specialists or the attorneys are going to come and do that interview. And so sometimes that leaves people in the team feeling that other members of the team are sort of above them, and stuff like that. And again, I don't think we never want to have that. We never want to have that, because that sort of affects our effectiveness in many ways. Because when people aren't feeling as good as maybe other members in the team, it's only normal as human beings that it may affect our morale or our enthusiasm. And so I think across the board, we'd like everyone who's in the case is helping us to get to the same place. And I think that's just a real baseline, of respect for everyone that's working, and value for everyone that's working, that they're going to help us to achieve the best outcome.
Yeah, anybody who knows me knows that I listen to a ton of podcasts. And a couple weeks ago, I was on quite a long drive. I had like 6 hours in the car. And I was traveling to see a witness, 6 hours to knock on the door, and he was not there, which often happens. And that's totally fine. But I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to Hidden Brain. And it was this episode about checklists. And the episode, there's people in the room who are giving me the thumbs up because it is awesome. So everybody should listen to it. But I'm going to, spoiler alert, if you're going to listen to it, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it right now. The part of the podcast sort of dealt with research that had been done on surgeries and outcomes of patients. And one of the things that the podcast sort of indicated to me was that the research on how to ensure that there are fewer post-op complications starts with the team in the room doing the surgery. And some of the things that hospitals who've been able to lower the infectious disease rate have implemented are very simple things that I think we really can do in our own work. One of the things is that when that surgical team gets into the room, everybody is told what the purpose is of being there, right? So like Chris was saying, when people don't really know what the whole team is doing or what the point is, it's very difficult to utilize your skill set to the max, right? The other thing that hospitals do, surgical teams do, is they'll have everybody say their name at the beginning of the surgery. Because what used to happen is surgeons sort of had this air about them. Maybe some lawyers are the same, I don't know. But nurses and other support staff would feel unable to say something if they felt like a mistake was about to be made. So just saying somebody's name at the beginning gives them the space, right, to be able to speak up. And that's what you want. You want all of your team members to feel like they can share what they think is happening and give that kind of feedback. We are in a life-saving practice, right? So there can't be a hierarchy. There has to be a collection of people who are there with the same purpose and who understand what the role of each member of the team is and how that sort of all functions together.
Yeah, totally. So this brings us onto our soccer slide.
Yeah, soccer.
Well, you know.
Football.
Yeah, football.
Football and all other parts of the world.
Right, exactly. I'll say football because I feel like it's a game where the foot is used a lot with the ball. So, I mean, you know, but it's no offense to my American football fans out there. But I think looking at actually soccer or looking at this diagram is a really good way to think about some of the work that we do actually in comparison with American football. So I don't claim to be an expert on American football, but what I do know from watching it is that, you know, in American football, we have separate teams who are all part of the same team, right? So I don't know, like offense, defense, and then kind of these special teams and so for each part of the game where appropriate or necessary, we bring on one of these teams or another one. And that's what I want us to stop doing, like with our work. And think of it more like a soccer field where everyone on the soccer field, you know, 11 players on each side, has a different role to play. They have different strengths and weaknesses, but they're all on the same field. Yeah, they're all in the same game. Yeah, and you know, and we are calling on different people from the team to strengthen different parts of the game and to be effective in different areas of the field. And so we need to think about it like that because, again, just to echo what Liz was saying, I think sometimes that's what happens, right? It's like the attorneys on a case they're going to have a separate meeting about sort of the legal stuff to do with the case, and almost sort of there's often sort of exclusion of other members of the team because, hey, you're not an attorney, so but we have to be kind of including everyone in what's going on. And just in the same way that some of the more complex aspects of mitigation attorneys might not be aware of, but we have to pull everyone in the team so that they understand where we're going. And we don't have to have some great knowledge of the law, but it's great to be able to explain, or for attorneys to explain to team members, hey, we're doing this, we're filing this motion, like, because some of the motions and things that are being filed may be connected to the investigation work that's being done, but we're not necessarily telling our investigators that this is where we're taking some of the great stuff that you're doing, and hey, everything's open, you know, everything's open for us to say, I want to learn more about, you know, whatever that case is that's being cited and what that comes into. So we have to like just remember that we're all like in the same game. You know, we're all pushing together and we're in the same field, and not to isolate team members or to separate people.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll add, actually, Chris said, you know, a person might not have great knowledge of the law. I have to say that when we have team meetings and when the team is really like humming along and things are going really well, it's the people who don't have the greatest legal knowledge that have some of the best ideas for litigation, right? And so it's also just realizing that we can be on our own silo. And because I actually think that the more you know, the worse you are, right? I mean, like, honestly, I wish I didn't know half the stuff that I know now, because it makes me like think that I have an answer when what I really need is for somebody in the room who is creative and open-minded and can give me feedback. And that's what good teams have, is they've created a space where everybody can say their thoughts and things are valued and there's no bad idea, right? We had a team meeting the other day on a case that I'm working on, and it was awesome. It was awesome for me because there was this legal issue and I had an idea. I had an idea about a motion that the team should file, and nobody else on the team had thought of it, and they loved it. And they were like, that's a great motion. And I'm like, great, lawyers, go find the law and like you do that. But that's the thing. They couldn't have seen it. They wouldn't have seen it because they don't hold the same position on the field that I hold. So I could see something that they couldn't see, right? So, every time you're drafting motions, you should be sharing that with members of your team. That's the expectation on the teams that I'm on, and I might find things. For example, I think a lot of people who end up doing capital litigation may have come from a felony background, and they might sort of struggle to make the switch from, felony cases to capital work. One of the ways that I see that so often is that people are not referring to their client in motions by the client's full name. So they might say Defendant Smith, moves the court, right? We don't want to be doing things like that, because that's just another way for us to continue to dehumanize and separate our clients from everybody else. I will catch that if I'm reviewing a motion, right? And I will let the team know that it needs to change. So there can be big things and there can be smaller things. But this is why it's so important to understand the positions on the field and how the team can operate as a cohesive unit, and how you can expect to rely on the people on your team to help you in those situations.
For sure. And just, I think just the final point on this, like just on this soccer field here, a team has a captain.
Yeah.
And that captain needs to know what each person does and what each person is doing. But I think it's also important to remember that, as in soccer, the captain is on the field. And he may not do all the tasks, but he is there. He is in the game as well. And so, a team needs a leader that's gonna make sure that everything is being done, and that strategically things are moving in the way that they should be. But at the same time, I think, to echo some of the earlier slides, it's not this idea that whoever the captain is or whoever the team leader is, that person is above everybody else.
Right.
Like, we have to think of the equality of the team and realize that, yes, there is a person who's going to be a driving force, who's going to take charge, but that person is not necessarily superior to anyone else as we move forward. But their role is important because the team needs a captain.
I will say this for everybody, and Chris knows this too, but there is no ineffective assistance of mitigation specialist, right? So a lot of what we're talking about is the fact that when you look at the ineffectiveness cases, it's on the lawyers, right? The lawyers need to know what's supposed to be happening in order to be the most effective captain as possible, right? So for the lawyers out there, the mitigators, the friends of the capital defender community, if you don't know these cases, you should. And I didn't put them on a slide because I'm going to tell you them now, and I hope that you look them up. You will find them online. Williams versus Taylor, 2000. Wiggins versus Smith, 2003. Rompia versus Beard, 2005. Porter versus McCollum, 2009. And Sears versus Upton, 2010. If you don't know those cases, read them. Anybody who says that they're a mitigation specialist needs to know these cases in addition to the ABA guidelines and the supplemental guidelines. So I just want to throw that out there.
Okay, so we're going to get into mitigation specialists. That's why we're here. What do
they do? Yeah.
Yeah. What do they do? What should they do? What should they be able to do?
Yeah.
So again, looking at the guidelines, which of course we know off by heart in the various languages.
Love those guidelines, man.
Yeah.
I don't think I could function without the guidelines, to be honest. I mean, because for real though, it's like I need something. I look at those guidelines routinely. And actually, part of that Hidden Brain episode that it made me think is every month what I should be doing is like look at those guidelines, and think about, am I doing the things I'm supposed to be doing in all of my cases, right? I need to refresh my mind because I've been doing this for a long time and I don't want to make silly mistakes and forget to do something that I'm supposed to do. So the guidelines are there as an educational tool. They're there as our touchstone, right? They give us the way forward. And thank goodness for them, because you know what? Like, I am not smart enough to have thought about all the stuff that's in the guidelines. And so I need that help, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think you should be looking at them sort of frequently. I mean, I think we're lucky. We're doing a lot of presentations where we're always using the guidelines. So it's kind of, which is great because they're sort of slowly more and more getting drummed in. And we really are getting to know them off by heart in terms of the things that we should do and shouldn't do and what our roles should be. And so this is part of it. Identifying, locating, and interviewing relevant persons in a culturally competent manner that produces confidential, relevant, and reliable information. So these are really baselines for the work that we do as mitigation specialists. Mm-hmm. But I think what we're going to start looking at as we move on is that, the work that we do is human work, identifying, locating, interviewing. We're interviewing people, We have to be culturally competent when we're doing that. We have to understand culture and communities that we're going to go into. And once we've done that and we start interviewing people, we have to be thinking about obtaining confidential and, more importantly, relevant and reliable information. Like, we have to be sort of getting information that's true, that truly reflects our clients.
It's true to the person. We'll talk about how sometimes true to the person is not accurate to other things, but that's important. It's important to know that.
Right, exactly. And his or her experiences and their life.
Do you want to go forward? Oh.
So,
this one next one.
Yeah. So, this is a little question that
I love this question.
That I've asked before, and it's to, ask you guys, what type of traveler are you? So, are you this person packed into economy or
sardine style,
or coach class, as I've heard said, or chicken or something class? Or are you this guy that I walk past often, who has those,
I wonder what that life is like.
Yeah, who's just like, he's just laid out. He has the Bose headphones, which are just given by the airline, and he's getting his Bucks Fizz in a real glass, and he has real cutlery, silver cutlery. Yeah. And as we go on to the next slide, why we're asking this question is to think about, when we get that email, like on the day of our flight or maybe a few days before, and it says, hey, you can upgrade your flight. You can upgrade to first class or business class for less than $100, for example. And sometimes a lot less, sometimes like $40 or something. Because, if you were traveling to somewhere new, or even if you weren't traveling to somewhere new, but for the purposes of investigation, would you still take it? Now, I am the economy class traveler for a couple of reasons. One, because this is what I can afford. But also because when we think about the types of mitigation specialists that we want to have on our teams, sometimes often when I'm traveling to a new country or to a new town, like, I want to be in economy class because I understand that I'm going to be a lot closer to the people there. And if it's a new country, especially because, I'm going to hear like how people speak. I'm going to, see how they laugh, and I'm going to want to ask them questions and know their names and where they're from. And it sort of prepares us for going into the field without being in this sort of very beautiful and comfy looking seat and being isolated, because sometimes mitigation specialists should be on a really packed bus or on a train, in a new place, just walking around a city just to see what it's like and to take in the atmosphere and the sights and the sounds and the smells, just to, sometimes we want to be, I mean, like, I wouldn't say completely like nose in someone's armpit, but I mean, that's getting close.
Proximity. Remember, you want to be proximate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, we want to be thinking about just take economy class, save the money for good local food.
Yeah. I love this picture.
And along that same vein, what that does sometimes, because, again, a lot of us may have like our air miles and all that kind of stuff. So like we want to take advantage of kind of getting an upgrade and stuff. But what I'm really trying to get at is that we have to step out of our comfort zone. Like we have to go into places that are not like the places that we used to, or sometimes places that might be hostile, but just might be completely different culturally, and we have to take those leaps, really more than steps, just leaps out of our comfort zone, because we have to see the client's environment. We have to see where he's from, where he lived. Like all these things that he might or someone else might tell us about in interviews, like we have to like walk down that street or see what the people are like or what shops there are in the area, because these, like, we don't have a narrative or a story or our client's life history sort of in some sort of bubble. There's an environmental backdrop. There's this place where it existed. We sort of, it's a canvas, that he's within, and that's how we have to really think about it.
Can I add something?
Yeah, for sure.
I think like mitigation investigation and the person that you pick to be your mitigator has to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like there's so many things that we do in the course of our investigation that in everyday life would be considered like kind of rude or like socially like inept. I might be in the house of a witness and physically I could tell that like they might want me to like depart, but until somebody tells me it's time for you to go, I'm on your couch and I'm not really paying attention to that, right? And I'm going to be like, so we're going to watch The Price is Right now? Like, that's what's going to happen? So this is what I'm saying. Like, whoever is the mitigator has to be able to traverse these spaces, to go into spaces that they might not be comfortable in. They might have to, like, willfully ignore, right, regular social cues in some instances. We're doing something that is difficult. And so finding a person who has the skill set, but also has the ability to exist in these spaces and be okay with their own discomfort is critical to finding a successful mitigation specialist.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's like, I mean, like, it's not saying that, oh, you're going to be this, you're going to be this like super tough guy, like who's,
you're not going to be rude.
Yeah. I mean, I travel to places. I might be in the car. I have the address. I get there, and I look around. I'm like, oh, okay, and you get that moment where you have to like suck it up, take that deep breath. I'm gonna go. I might be in a difficult area or a rough part of town, and I just have to really, think about like this is so important. And I think that the issue about stepping out of the comfort zone and being in these uncomfortable situations is that in this work we can't cherry pick the things that we want to do, the things that we are comfortable with. We have to be in difficult positions. We have to be in uncomfortable positions. We have to be in sometimes difficult and hostile situations, and we have to learn and build on our skill set to be able to operate in those areas. And if we can't, again, we have to look at whether we're able to do this work, and as sort of people assembling teams have to look at whether a person is going to be suitable for that work, because we can't pull everyone to us. We have to go to where people are, and again, we have to be close. We have to be proximate to where things have happened. We have to see it. Like, how do we talk about it if we haven't seen it? Like, just, it's not the same to look at, for family members to bring photographs into the office or things like that. We have to go there, and we have to take those leaps out of our comfort zone. And you'd be surprised at how much respect you get, how much trust you build when a family member realizes that I'm okay, with coming to see you. I'm okay coming here and sitting with you watching The Price is Right, or just talking about life, and I'm okay. I'm completely comfortable.
It makes me think of this. Like, actually, I wasn't. This just popped into my head. But in a little bit, I'm going to share some like documents with the group here, and it's the same case. The grandmother who I ended up spending a lot of time with, African American, and she said to me, like pretty, I wouldn't say early on in our relationship, but like we'd spent, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 hours together, like at that stage. And she looked at me one day on the couch and she was like, "Were you raised around black people?" And I was like, I was raised in in a area where it was pretty mixed, And she's like, "Because a lot of white people here are not comfortable being in this apartment complex." And, it was such like a stunning moment with her, right? Where she's recognizing, like she's talking about race in this way and what her experiences have been with white people in her community. They're not comfortable coming here, right? And that led us to have a really interesting conversation of what it was like for her to grow up in that community, right? And for me to be white and to be in her space and how that was, right? So yeah. A lot of times teams will say to us, well, can't we just call? If somebody just showed up at my house, I'd be so upset. Like I'd never, but like, this is what we're saying is like, you have to go to the places and do the work and everything else follows from there. Right. But it's just beyond important. Chris, you've got a video next. I don't know how this is going to work. I'm going to roll with it and hope it happens. Here it is.
Oh yeah, go over.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, right there. All right.
So, yeah, that's a video from a mitigation trip that I took earlier this year to Haiti for a Florida-based client. In a case where, we were successfully able to get a life sentence. And, Haiti's a difficult environment, but we had to go there. We had to go there and meet the client's family and friends and drive on some of the toughest roads I've ever driven on in my life, to go to little remote villages and meet with people who knew him, who could tell us his life history, who tell us about him, the things that motivated him, how his family was, how they survived, how they lived day to day. And it was, we couldn't have got it any other way than going there. We couldn't have got such compelling information that was later told by some of his family members. We just had to go there and find these places. And for me, it was amazing. It was, so fascinating to listen to people, to travel around the country, to find people. And I think sometimes we have to also get away from sometimes what we've heard in the media about different places and think, like, there's an opportunity for us to just find this kind of rich information about our clients' lives and to, like, spend so much time smiling when you're hearing people talk about this person that you've met, across the table, the person that you're speaking on behalf of, and to be like, wow, this is his life through the eyes of other people and the experiences and shared experience, and it's incredible, and so sometimes stepping out of our comfort zone isn't this thing that's going to be frightening or it's so hard to do. Sometimes and often it's amazing, and we just have to think often about, like, going to a place like Haiti or going to a city in the United States. Like, who is the best person that we can get to do that? Who is going to be good on the ground at meeting people, finding them, getting that information, and bringing back videos and photos like these that really help us progress in our cases and really help us to tell accurate and authentic stories about our clients.
Totally. The last thing I'll say about this is watching this video, you think about what the government or the state has, the evidence of harm that our clients may have caused, right? The allegations. Aggravation is baked into the process. It is wall to wall, right? So what are the things that the defense needs to do to help bring that life into that space, that courtroom, that document, right? Chris could have sat here and given us a verbal description of what this street looked like. And I could try in my mind to picture it. But seeing it is just so fundamentally different, right? And this is what I mean when I say build bridges to empathy, right? We have to create that same connection that the government or the state has automatically, right? Automatically, people feel something when they hear about the devastation that crime has caused, right? Automatically. We need to create that automatic feeling as well. And you can't do that as successfully, I have found, if it is just people, describing sometimes. You have to show and tell, right? That's what moves people. So some of the ways that people, I think, disqualify themselves from being a mitigation specialist is if they don't follow the best practices, right? So are they following the best practices as identified by the ABA guidelines? And so here they are. It's no secret. No group interviews, no phone interviews. You need somebody who's going to go back time and time again because this is relationship building, right? You're not going to get the information that is going to really be rich and detailed and textured if it's a one-time 30-minute conversation over the phone. And another way of understanding this is I spoke to a mitigation specialist who said to me, I stopped doing phone interviews after I had thought I developed a pretty good relationship with a witness. The witness shows up at court only to find that the witness is an amputee. And she didn't know that. And why would she? Because you're on the phone with somebody. And those are not the sort of things that a person's going to tell you over the phone. Oh, FYI, I lost my legs, right? So you have to go see people. So this is, in addition to the rapport and just absorbing the culture, absorbing a community, you are missing valuable pieces of information. We hold our trauma in our bodies. If you haven't read Trauma and Recovery or The Body Keeps the Score, those are two books that everybody who is with us today needs to read, right? We can see people's traumatic patterning in the way that they hold themselves, the way that they shift their bodies, right? The way that they stop making eye contact at certain points. You cannot do this remotely, right? So you can't tell people that you're coming ahead of time. That is the quickest way to ensure that you don't get any investigation done. And is it because people are avoiding us because they don't like us? Maybe they don't like us. But I find that more often than not, what's happening is we represent something difficult, right? And like any human being, I don't want to do my taxes, okay? I wait until the last minute to do that shit, right? And I know it's coming. And I don't do it because I don't want to pay taxes. I don't do it because it is just hard, right? So if given the opportunity to avoid a difficult experience, it is human nature to not want to step into that space, right? So you can't tell people, you can't ask them to meet you at a Starbucks to be having a conversation, right? It's not how this is going to work. So you go to the home generally, right? That's where we meet people. We go to their homes. We spend time with them. We don't tape record or video record unless there's a real specific reason to do so. I have been seeing a lot of videos recently, just people taking videos, and I'm not really sure why. Because there hasn't been any strategic decision by the team as to the importance of doing that. And because we're creating relationships and we're modeling the kind of relationships that we want people to have, we can't tell witnesses what other people have said, right? So your mitigation specialist has to believe these things, has to do these things, right? Needs to follow the rules. Yeah. That's what makes a mitigation specialist is to do this.
And I think we have to, I talk a lot about kind of how we visualize what we do, or how we think about the spaces that we create, or how we think about the actual work and the mitigation work that we do, and thinking about it as kind of in your mind as like the process or as a journey in many ways, because we have to think about this long process, this long haul that we're involved in. Think about how we're doing things. We have to be like in interviews and thinking about like how is that interview finishing? How am I laying the groundwork to come back? How am I thinking about that interview or that visit flowing into the next one? And what are the moves that I'm making to try to make sure that there's going to be another one? Because I know that with each meeting I'm going to build more trust. I'm going to find more things out. I'm going to find things more out about the person and about them and their life, and sometimes completely unconnected to the facts of the case. Just like, again, just human, real basic human exchange, finding out what washing detergent they use in the house, or like, what cars they like, or different things. Actually, or what shows on TV.
Yeah, you saying the washing detergent makes me think, like, what detergent do you use, and how did you pick that detergent?
I think it's based on advertising.
Is it based on advertising? I use what my mom used.
Oh yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
Well, I think my mom used what
yeah.
I don't know. Persil is good. I don't know if you guys have that.
No, we don't have it, but it is good. I like Fairy brands typically, but but that's the thing, right? We could see something that seems relatively innocuous, like what kind of washing up soap somebody's using, or detergent, right? And it might seem like it is irrelevant, but for all we know, that's how the reason the person's using it is because that's how they were taught, or that's the familiarity, right? That's what's familiar to them. And those are the important things, because you know what? Tide is more expensive than other kinds of brands, right? And so this tells us information. Like, all of this is gathering information, and you don't know the value of the information. Certainly you don't know the value if you don't have it, but then you don't know the value if you can't put it into context, right?
But,
go ahead.
But I think also just think, like, sometimes, get out of thinking, like, of the work that we do in mitigation as sort of being alien to the things that we do anyway. Like, because I think, again, once you have built a lot of trust with a family member or witness, well, it's just like our family members or our really good friends. Like, right. We don't need an invitation to go to their house. We don't have to call. We just pop by. We're like, hey, how you doing? Like, and that's how we have to think. So we have to think sometimes to be kind of less rigid in like this way that we're doing things, and think about how things work sometimes. Sometimes, yes, like we have to just go to places. And again, we can't take the easy way out. Again, we can't say, oh, I called, but they don't want to meet me this week. Like, because, yes, the other end of the phone line is an easy way to say no, right. And so we have to say, I'm going to go to that place again, or I'm going to go to that address where I've been 5 times and nobody answered the door, and keep letting them know that what we're trying to do, what's, why we're trying to do what we do, and just, really work hard at not sort of in many ways saying, okay, like I sent a text, I called, they haven't got back to me. Like, I think those sometimes, to be really honest, that we're taking the easy way out, and we have to realize that this human work is crucial to what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it goes for the connection with the client as well, right? A lot of times, especially when I'm starting to work on a new case with a new team, I'll get the question from members of the team, like, what are you going to talk to the client about? Like, what are the things that you're going to go over? And I'm like, I can't actually answer that because I don't know. I'm going to show up and I'm going to have a conversation about whatever the client wants to talk about, right? And I'm going to start that conversation basically checking in with them and asking how they're doing. And go from there, right? Certainly there are things that I want to learn, but I'm not going to show up with my agenda, right? I'm not going to show up with a list of questions that need to be asked, right? That's not human work. That's something clinical, and it's not proximate, right? Like, I mean, we're not distancing ourselves. So we're going to, I'm going to spend all day in that prison or that jail. I might be there for 10 hours. If that's what my client is, if that's what he or she's down to do, then that's what I'm going to do too. And we're going to be engaged in conversation, right? Like, that's, to me, again, you want to be picking a mitigation specialist who is going to show up regularly, spend time with the client, and report back to the team, right? And we'll talk in a minute about what sort of documents you should expect to get from a mitigation specialist, but memos from all the visits with the client and witnesses, oh my gosh, that is incredible, are what we expect people to be creating. So unless you have something you want to add, I'm going to just roll on through here. Okay. And
I think a lot of it's about exchange. So a lot of team members or attorneys sometimes and mitigation specialists will say, hey, like, I'm the type of person who I don't really like to share anything too personal with a client. And I think we have to, because again, we have to go back to what a human relationship is and what human interaction is, and that's based on sharing. That's based on us sharing experience, and by us doing that, sharing our culture, our experiences, our own life history, that's how we build trust. That's how we build rapport, and it's so important to be able to give as well as taking, because it just helps with the whole trust building process.
Okay, so mitigation specialists, they work on two tracks, right? They do this very, very human work with people face-to-face in direct proximity, but they also have to be really good at document collection and analysis. So anybody that you hire to be your mitigation specialist needs to understand that there are these general sort of types and categories of records. And they need to understand why it is that, for example, a subpoena might not be the thing to use. Like, what are the potential pitfalls in not using a HIPAA-compliant authorization to obtain records, right? They need to understand that there's going to be a lot of material in courthouses and what the different kinds of courthouse searches are in a particular jurisdiction that would be available to them. They need to understand what they could get with public record requests, both at the state and the federal level, right? And they need to be really good at understanding what's available through social media and archival research, right? So you might find a person who's very good with witnesses, but is like a straight up disaster when it comes to collecting documents. That person can't be your mitigation specialist. Maybe they could be something else, but your mitigation specialist has to be able to perform both of these functions.
Yeah, completely.
So your mitigation specialist should know this too, right? This, again, is from ABA guidelines. This isn't anything sophisticated. These are basic records. Your mitigation specialist needs to understand that they are collecting 3 generations of these records for, every family member, right? And we do 3 generations because 2 generations is not enough to detect patterns of behavior, right? You have to go back far enough so you can begin to see connections. And your mitigation specialist needs to be able to know that, if they get some records from Social Security, is this a complete set? If they request records from a Department of Corrections, have they gotten everything? Because in Texas, the Department of Corrections has 5 facilities that you have to request records from. In Pennsylvania, it goes to 1 place, right? So your mitigation specialist has to be able to know what does it mean to get a full set of records back, right? Do you have anything?
Yeah, and I think as tough as it can be to kind of get all these records, to get people to sign releases and all this kind of stuff, I think once you start to get them and you start to analyze them, you see how amazingly sort of these records tell a story of a person's life history and that of his family and his community, and how, what are the causes of certain things, and where certain pressure points emerge in a person's life, just based on the things that were happening with him, with his family, within his local community. So I think it's, they are a huge part of the story that we tell, that we combine with everything that we learn from witnesses. So we have to take it as far as it can go and work out, which doors it opens to other records and how it gives us ideas about, being creative about the things that we're looking for.
So we really were just super chatty, which is always a problem. And just for the future, I feel like a big clock would be awesome. So I'm going to skip my stories. And if there's time, I'll come back to them. Or if anybody wants to ask a question about what those slides were, we could. 2 questions so far. Okay, cool. All right. So, but I will skip those for now. And if people want to hear it, then they can ask. But I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to some of the real nuts and bolts here, right? Okay. So what should you expect from your mitigation specialist? These are documents that your mitigation specialist should understand how to create, right? So a comprehensive cast of characters or people list, right? Every single name that appears in the documents and all the names that come up through interactions with the client and witnesses, all those names have to live someplace, right? Because there's no way for you to know how, what the next steps are if you don't have all the names in one place, right? So your mitigation specialist needs to know how to do that. Same thing with a chronology or a timeline, right? There needs to be a comprehensive timeline, not just a separate one for the facts, right? The alleged, alleged offense, and then something separate for your client's social history, right? There's something that is combined, so you can see things happening up against each other, right? And it needs to go back 3 generations. So when I look at a chronology, I'm expecting to see it go back to the 1870s, right? Because I'm looking for grandparents typically. So can your mitigation specialist produce that? Do they understand how that's supposed to be formed? Records logs, right? Because this person is both interviewer and record collector, they have to be able to maintain a log of what they've collected, what needs to be collected, all the efforts that they've, exerted to get these documents. They have to have indices, right? An index for the records, for the interview memos, an investigation plan, family tree, and then memos for all the interactions, right? And then the last thing I'll just say is a theory memo. I find that a lot of mitigators, especially if they're early on in their career, have not really done theory memos before, and I don't really know how the case moves forward without one. So you might get a document that says that your client was absent for 27 days during one semester of a school year, right? I don't know what that means, right? Because, being absent for 27 days, it could be that, the client was sick. It could be that the client needed to be the primary caretaker of other kids in the home. It could be that the client has some sort of disability and would forget to get up on time and so was late, chronically late, right? It could be so many things, right? So standing alone, that piece of information doesn't really mean anything, right? So we have to be able to create theory memos that allow us to look at this piece of information and see how it fits into the narrative. So those are the basic documents that anybody should should expect from a mitigation specialist.
Yeah, and I think, again, if you are a mitigation specialist or you have someone on the team who's really good out in the field, like, you cannot shortcut any of this stuff.
Right.
Like, you have to be making records. You have to be adding those dates in, because
Totally.
you have to, when we go and say, hey, we need this amount of hours, we have to also factor in like all this analysis that you're going to do, working out how everything meshes together by creating these kind of core documents that shape your work and that keep a record of your work, without it just being some conversation about, hey, I went and saw a client's mom, she's doing great, she told me all this stuff, and it's not written down anywhere. And we have to kind of start to think about like doing all these things, which sometimes can be like, hard to do after a day out in the field. But again, we cannot take these shortcuts. We have to do them.
Yeah, honestly, there's not much point in you doing it if you're not going to write it down or not like put it into a document in some way, because you're going to lose the information. So it's really important that your mitigator knows how to do that. I'm going to skip that. I'm sorry. I'm just making some executive decisions here.
That's
I do
all right.
want to talk about diagnoses, right? So I come across a lot of folks who are new to mitigation who have a background in mental health, and so their training has been to reach a diagnosis. And so in the context of mitigation, most of the time a diagnosis is dehumanizing, right? And remember, our definition of mitigation is to build that bridge to empathy. So when we label somebody as schizophrenic, to a lot of people that's quite scary, right? So what matters the most and what can be most mitigating is a description, the anecdotal information about how the client's mental health affected his or her trajectory in life, right? So we're not going quickly to a diagnosis. Of course, intellectual disability is a different thing because that's a categorical bar. And your mitigation specialist, whoever you hire to fill that role, needs to understand those challenges and those differences.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important. I think I've worked with so many teams where we're sort of desperately chasing some sort of diagnosis, some sort of piece of paper that says our client is this or he's that. And so we're on a one-track focus to try and find that. And sometimes we are not, and even when we do have strong evidence of mental health or intellectual disability, we're not searching for those stories that go around that, those instances, those life events that sort of tell the story of that condition. And so we think we have to look at kind of a bigger picture approach, I think, and see how that affects everyone, how it affects the events, the family, and everyone when we're going down that path.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And that sort of brings us to this notion that, I think a lot, when I started doing mitigation work, I fell into that trap, right? Where I would get like records from a medical health provider, and I would find a diagnosis and I'd be like, I found it, like this great thing, right? Because that's the messed up world that we live in, where we're like happy that this awful thing is in a document. But anyway, so I would be like, wow, we got it. And I was failing to recognize this bridge to empathy, right? And so thinking when you hire your mitigator, the ability for them to identify the strengths in your client's documents and in the history of your client, right? The capacity to learn, teach, a sense of humor, right? Creativity, spirituality, your client's insight. I have a client who has one of the most severe trauma histories I've ever come across. And when we talk about his trauma history, you know what it means to me? He's a survivor, right? He is resilient, right? Because that is a lot of stuff that he's gone through, and he's alive, right? So your mitigation specialist needs to be able to see those things in these documents. In addition to the struggles, where are the strengths? So we know that. Okay, I really wanted to make sure that we got to these last couple slides here because I think that they're really important. So over the course of the last few years, I've been really thinking about what are some like screening questions basically that teams can use when they're interviewing people to be a mitigation specialist. And I don't suggest that this is like comprehensive, but this is just a basic set of questions that you should be asking people as you're trying to find the right person for your case. Are you familiar with the guidelines, the supplementary guidelines, and case law? Right? They have to be familiar with that because that gives the framework for this job in particular. What's their current caseload? In my office, 2 to 3 cases death penalty cases is a full caseload for a mitigation specialist, right?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
I think, again, I think we're coming across too many offices or too many mitigation specialists who are talking about, they're running 10 cases,
gosh,
and it's
stroke.
absurd for me personally to think that I could do more than 5, and that's really, really difficult. And I think we have to think again, like how intensive this work is, and like we cannot do it effectively if we have too much of it. That's just as a baseline thing.
Right. Do they engage in the best practices, the stuff that Chris and I have been talking about? Can they identify signs and symptoms of mental health, intellectual disability, and trauma? And I would ask them for the last 3 trainings they attended related to mitigation work, providing the names, locations, and numbers of hours that the training lasted. And I would also request references.
Yeah.
Because this person, it's like the same with your experts, right? You're going to vet your experts. This is your opportunity to make sure that this is a death penalty case. So this is not the time to get a novice on this team. You're looking for an experienced person who knows what they're doing, right?
Right. And at the same time, I think when you're looking at experts who want to talk about a specific thing, you don't necessarily want an expert who's going to talk about that specific thing like 50 years ago. We want it, we may need that knowledge of now or of the last couple of years. And it's the same as mitigation specialists. We have to be attending these trainings to keep our skills updated, our understanding of what things are changing in the field, so that we are, out there in the front line and we are fresh in terms of our knowledge and our skills.
Yeah. So here we go. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, then it's a duck. So if they can answer those questions in the way that, they should, then they're a mitigation specialist. But does that mean that they're your person? Not necessarily, right? So then you do from general to specific. And these are some questions that I like to ask people. What do you think is important in client visits, right? What about the first time you meet a client? What about culture, right? If the client is from X culture, country, race, religion, how would that inform your work? I'm interested in how they think about their position and, connecting with the client. Experience with investigating particular kinds of cases, right? And I would ask them to describe how they work with consulting or testifying mental health experts. But I think we hopefully have made it through with a little bit of time for questions, and we're happy to take them. This is your choice of mitigators. Find the right one for your teams.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're going to end with saying that, before we have a couple of questions, that let's just kind of, again, every client's different, every case is different. So let's sort of take that approach to how we assemble a team, and think about the different people who are out there, and please feel free to contact us for recommendations, just to make sure that we're getting the person who's the right fit, however, whatever they look like, whatever their background is, but making sure that fits in with what we need and what the client needs.
Okay, so let's start with probably the easiest one, which is that a list of notable cases for mitigation specialists was mentioned during the webinar. Could you please repeat the list or send it? And we will send it, but maybe you could repeat it anyway.
Let me just make sure. So I want to do it in order. I have this bad habit of turning over all of my. It's towards the beginning. I want to make sure that I give you the years too, and it's the years that I'm particularly bad with. Okay, so Williams versus Taylor, 2000. Wiggins versus Smith, 2003. Rompilla, spelled Rompilla, versus Beard, 2005. Porter versus McCollum, spelled McCollum, 2009, and Sears versus Upton, 2010. And that was easy, thank you.
So the next question is also fairly easy.
Excellent.
And that is, will the slides presented and a list of cases mentioned in the webinar be available to us later? And I think the answer is that we are going to try to make the slides available in some fashion. And we will also, when we transmit that, include the list of cases. Now, this one, this last one, is less direct, but
Okay.
I think you're going to have great thoughts on it. If the presenters have time, I would like to know whether the presenters have opinions on the role of self-disclosure in building rapport with clients and relationships. Of course, the focus should always be on the client or witness, but to what extent do mitigation specialists self-disclose to help people feel more comfortable, of course, within the limits of representation and about appropriate subjects? And after some follow-up, noted that the question refers both to self-disclosure of relatively details about you that are not terribly personally invasive, like your family or your education or interests and whatnot, but also as well as things that may be personally invasive, like self-disclosure of your own past traumas or your own struggles. Both, the question pertains to both of these kinds of things.
Yeah. Do you mind if I start off?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. I think it's an extraordinarily good question, so I'm really glad that it was asked. So I take my lead from the client, right? If my client asks me something, I try to find the most general way to respond to that question. So if my client says to me, so what is, like, where did you go to school? Like, what's your degree in? I'll just, I'll say, I've got a degree in philosophy. Is not really, didn't really teach me very much. Have you ever read any philosophy books? Like, I will try to find a way to like turn it back so it's not so much on me, right? Because I find that if I start like, it's almost like being a good witness on the witness stand. Like you want to respond to the question that's asked, but you don't necessarily want to give so much more, right? Because you're really there to try to learn about the client. And my curiosity would be, why is the client asking? But I'm not going to say it like that, right? But I'm wondering like where that question is coming from, and I'm trying to find ways to like figure out like what it is that the client. What that means to the client, right? Some of my clients like really love animals. I find that that's like a very safe space where I might, disclose something without them asking specific things. Like if my client likes animals, and my client, I might say to my client, oh yeah, I have a dog. So that sort of indicates like this is something that I will talk about, right? So I think that there are techniques that we use as investigators that help us navigate these conversations in the same way that we do with witnesses.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, like just to kind of visualize things, I think of like sort of being across the table and trying to find like ways for us to both be here, to both be in the middle of that table. And, and I think it's important to never ever say like, or to rarely say like, I don't want to answer that. I don't want to tell you about that. Like, but I think you find ways to share things so that like that person just as a human being can realize that, okay, this isn't all about like, oh, I'm the one who's just going to give all of me. And like, you're not even going to tell me where you're from or about your family. But I think also that once you've built trust with a client, I think, there may be scope to open up about things because it's about sharing, and it's about, again, just as in a normal human way that like you do trust the client as well in many ways, and some things will be tough, like I think about like death in the family is one that comes up, and you'll often be asked, do you know what it feels like, or have you lost someone close to you, and you're not going to be able to say no,
of course,
because you have, and I think, and sometimes just saying yes is all it takes for that point of connection. But maybe you give it a little bit more. But I don't think you can take a stance where you're like, I don't share anything about my life. I don't like I keep that to myself, because then there isn't that exchange, and we're not able to enter into each other's world. And I think that's how we build trust. But we just have to sometimes, in our mind, when we're answering those questions, just edit things down, make it in a way that works for that person.
Totally.
Well, thank you everyone very much for participating and for attending. Unless there are any closing comments.
No, this was great. I hope it was for everybody else too. Thanks for everything.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
Thanks to the NACDL
Yeah.
for having us, and I'm sure we'll be able to share the presentation and maybe ways for us people to access it later as well
sure.
who weren't able to log on today. But thanks.
Well,
Yeah.
that was exactly what I was going to say. So thank you all again, and have a good afternoon.